Imagine waking up tomorrow morning to news reports of stars literally falling from the sky, a third of all trees and grass burning simultaneously across every continent, and world leaders admitting they have no scientific explanation for what's happening. The ancient prophecies your grandmother whispered about in hushed tones are no longer dusty religious theories. They're breaking news on every channel, trending on social media, and reshaping reality as we know it. What if the most terrifying book ever written wasn't just a symbolic vision, but an actual preview of coming events that are about to unfold in our lifetime? Welcome to our channel, where we explore forbidden questions and hidden truths of history, religion, and the unknown. If you love journeys that challenge what you thought you knew, make sure to join us, because today's story may change the way you see everything. 2,000 years ago, an old man named John sat alone on a rocky island, receiving visions that would become the final book of the Bible. What he saw was so shocking, so terrifying, and so detailed that it has haunted humanity ever since. But what if those weren't just visions of some distant future? What if they were news reports from tomorrow morning? Chapter 1. The Final Vision. John never wanted to see the end of the world. Banished to the barren island of Patmos for preaching about Jesus, he thought his ministry was over. The Roman Empire had scattered the disciples, destroyed Jerusalem, and seemed unstoppable. But on one ordinary Sunday, everything changed forever. A voice behind him spoke like thunder. When John turned around, he saw Jesus, but not the gentle teacher from Galilee. This Jesus had eyes like fire, a voice like rushing water, and a face that shone brighter than the sun. In his hand were 7 stars, and from his mouth came a sword that could cut through reality itself. What Jesus showed John next was the future of planet Earth, unfolding like a cosmic movie that no Hollywood director could ever imagine. John saw 7 seals on a scroll that contained God's final plan for humanity. As each seal broke open, disasters would strike the Earth with surgical precision. A quarter of humanity would die. The oceans would turn to blood. Mountains would be thrown into the sea. But the most terrifying part wasn't the disasters themselves. It was how perfectly they matched the technology and global connections of our modern world. John saw a mark on people's hands and foreheads, without which no one could buy or sell anything. He watched the whole world worship an image that could speak and kill. He witnessed every nation on earth bowing down to one man who claimed to be God. For 2,000 years, theologians wondered how these ancient visions could ever come true. Today, we have social media, global markets, digital currencies, artificial intelligence, and satellite networks that make John's prophecies not just possible, but inevitable. The infrastructure for the end of the world already exists in your smartphone. Chapter 2. Signs in the Heavens. The first sign appears at exactly 3:33 a.m. Jerusalem time. Astronomers at observatories around the world simultaneously detect an impossible phenomenon. Stars are moving in patterns that violate every law of physics. Not meteors or space debris, but actual stars, changing position in coordinated formations that spell out words in ancient Hebrew across the night sky. Within minutes, social media explodes with amateur videos from every continent. The International Space Station reports that Earth's magnetic field is fluctuating wildly, creating aurora displays visible even in broad daylight. NASA holds an emergency press conference, but their scientists can only admit they have no explanation for what's happening above our planet. The moon turns blood red during what should have been a normal Tuesday afternoon, visible to half the world's population in broad daylight. Pilots report that their instruments are malfunctioning as they fly through patches of space that seem to shimmer like water. Air traffic controllers watch planes disappear from radar for minutes at a time, only to reappear exactly where they should be. Religious leaders recognize these events immediately. They've been reading about them in Revelation chapter 6 for their entire careers. The sun becomes black as sackcloth, the moon turns to blood, and the stars fall to earth like figs shaken from a tree. What seemed like ancient poetry suddenly becomes breaking news. Scientists work frantically to find rational explanations, but their instruments only confirm what their eyes are telling them. The laws of nature are being systematically suspended by an intelligence far beyond human understanding. The heavens themselves are sending humanity a message that's impossible to ignore. Chapter 3: The Breaking Point. The first trumpet sounds at dawn over Jerusalem, but the whole world hears it, not through speakers or radio waves, but directly in their minds, like a cosmic alarm clock waking humanity from its spiritual sleep. Within hours, 1/3 of all trees and grass on Earth burst into flames simultaneously, creating fires that burn without spreading and cannot be extinguished by any known method. Emergency services become overwhelmed as identical reports flood in from every continent. The fires burn perfectly within their boundaries, consuming exactly 1/3 of all vegetation while leaving everything else untouched. Firefighters stand helpless as their water turns to steam before reaching the flames, and their foam dissolves in mid-air. Social media platforms crash under the weight of millions of users posting identical videos of the impossible. Governments activate emergency broadcast systems, but no one knows what to tell their citizens. The president addresses the nation with words no leader ever expected to speak. We are witnessing events that appear to be beyond our current scientific understanding. Churches that had been nearly empty for decades suddenly overflow with people seeking answers. Pastors who had preached about Revelation as symbolic literature find themselves explaining literal fulfillment to packed congregations. Atheist professors publicly abandon their materialist worldview as they watch supernatural events unfold in real time on their laboratory instruments. The moment arrives when humanity must choose between clinging to old explanations that no longer work, or accepting that something greater than human knowledge is taking control of their world. For many, this moment breaks their understanding of reality forever. Chapter 4: The Beast Rises. During the chaos of the burning earth, a leader emerges who seems to have all the answers. He appears simultaneously on every television network, social media platform, and digital screen in the world, speaking directly to each viewer in their native language, without translation. His message is simple: unity, peace, and technological solutions to humanity's greatest crisis. Within weeks, this charismatic figure negotiates an end to every major conflict on Earth. Wars that have raged for decades stop overnight as both sides accept his mediation. World stock markets stabilize under his economic policies. The burning vegetation mysteriously stops spreading after he announces a global environmental initiative. Nations voluntarily transfer their emergency powers to his newly formed Global Crisis Management Authority. Constitutional safeguards that took centuries to establish disappear with a few signatures as desperate governments authorize whatever measures necessary to maintain order. Democracy becomes a luxury that humanity can no longer afford during the emergency. The new system works flawlessly at first. crime rates plummet under global surveillance networks that can track every human movement in real time. Poverty begins to disappear as the new economic system redistributes resources with algorithmic precision. Disease outbreaks end quickly thanks to mandatory health monitoring implants that detect infections before symptoms appear. But the cost of this perfect society becomes clear when the first person tries to opt out. Refusing the new identification system means losing access to employment, banking, healthcare, and even grocery stores. The mark starts as a voluntary convenience, but becomes mandatory for survival itself. Chapter 5: War in Heaven. The battle begins above the city of Jerusalem at exactly noon, when witnesses report seeing figures in brilliant white appearing in the clouds above the Temple Mount. Military radar stations worldwide detect objects moving at impossible speeds through Earth's atmosphere, engaging in what can only be described as aerial combat, using weapons that emit pure light. Fighter jets scramble from 3 different air forces converge on Jerusalem, but their missiles pass harmlessly through the combatants, while their electronic systems fail completely. Pilots report seeing beings with wings larger than their aircraft, wielding swords that cut through the fabric of space itself. The battle spreads to other major cities, as similar conflicts erupt over New York, London, Moscow, and Beijing. News helicopters capture footage of the impossible: angels and demons fighting in broad daylight above the world's population centers. The beings appear both physical and spiritual simultaneously, casting shadows on the ground while passing through solid objects when convenient. Their weapons create explosions of light visible for hundreds of miles, but cause no damage to buildings or aircraft below. The defeated army retreats downward, and suddenly the character of Earth's atmosphere changes completely. What had been an invisible spiritual battle becomes a visible occupation. Demonic entities that had operated in shadows for millennia now walk openly among humans, no longer constrained by the boundaries that had previously limited their influence. The beast's power increases dramatically as his supernatural allies take positions throughout human governments, religious institutions, and media organizations. Miracles become commonplace, but their source is clearly not divine. Humanity finds itself caught between 2 opposing supernatural forces, with neutrality no longer an option. Chapter 6: The Great Persecution. The New World Order's first official act targets what the global authority calls religious extremists, anyone who refuses to acknowledge the beast as humanity's savior. Christians and Jews who continue practicing their traditional faiths suddenly find themselves classified as enemies of world peace and human unity. Social credit scores automatically adjust downward for citizens who attend unauthorized religious gatherings or share biblical content online. Artificial intelligence monitors every digital communication, flagging discussions about Jesus, prophecy, or resistance to the new system. Children receive rewards at school for reporting parents who pray or read Bibles at home. The persecution uses 21st century technology to achieve first-century goals. Facial recognition systems identify believers at underground church meetings. Cryptocurrency wallets belonging to known Christians are frozen automatically. GPS tracking in mandatory identification implants ensures that no one can disappear from the system's surveillance. But something supernatural sustains those who refuse to abandon their faith. Believers report miraculous provisions appearing when they need food, safe houses becoming invisible to surveillance systems, and digital communications reaching their intended recipients despite algorithmic censorship. The 144,000 witnesses mentioned in Revelation begin appearing in major cities, preaching with supernatural protection that makes them immune to arrest or harm. Underground networks develop using methods that combine ancient Christian practices with modern encryption technology. House churches meet in Faraday cages to avoid electronic detection. Believers communicate using coded references to Scripture that artificial intelligence cannot interpret. The gospel spreads faster during persecution than it ever had during peaceful times. Chapter 7: Economic Collapse. The global economy shatters like glass when the second trumpet sounds, and something like a great mountain burning with fire is thrown into the sea. 1/3 of all marine life dies instantly, causing a domino effect that destroys entire food chains and coastal economies within days. Shipping routes that carry most of the world's trade become impossible to navigate as Dead Sea creatures create massive floating graveyards across major ports. The stench reaches hundreds of miles inland, forcing evacuations of major coastal cities. Insurance companies collapse under claims they never imagined having to pay. Currency values fluctuate wildly as traditional economic models fail to account for supernatural intervention in natural systems. The beast's economic advisors present a solution: a completely digital monetary system that can adapt instantly to crisis conditions and eliminate the chaos of multiple competing currencies. The new system requires every human to receive a biometric identifier that links their physical body to their economic activity. No cash, no anonymous transactions, no private wealth that isn't monitored and controlled by the global authority. The mark becomes humanity's only access to economic participation. Underground economies develop among those who refuse the mark, but they operate like resistance movements in occupied territories. Bartering systems emerge using physical goods that can't be traced digitally. Hidden networks of unmarked believers create parallel supply chains for food, shelter, and medical care. They live as economic refugees in their own countries. Chapter 8: Religious Revolution. The world's largest Christian denominations split down the middle as their leadership faces an impossible choice between institutional survival and biblical faithfulness. Mainstream churches that acknowledge the beast's authority receive government funding, tax benefits, and protection from persecution. Those that resist face immediate closure and arrest of their clergy. The Vatican announces that the prophecies of Revelation are being fulfilled, but in unexpected ways that require new theological interpretation. The Pope declares that the beast represents humanity's evolutionary step toward divine consciousness, and that resistance to this progress constitutes sin against God's plan for human development. Prosperity gospel preachers enthusiastically endorse the new system, teaching their followers that the mark represents God's blessing and that refusing it demonstrates a lack of faith in divine providence. They perform miracles on international television, healing the sick and prophesying accurately about future events through powers that are clearly supernatural but not divine. Orthodox believers retreat into underground movements that more closely resemble the first-century church than anything Christianity has experienced in over 1,000 years. They meet in homes, caves, and abandoned buildings, celebrating communion with whatever bread and wine they can obtain, and baptizing converts in hidden locations under cover of darkness. The gospel message becomes crystal clear during persecution in ways that comfortable Christianity never achieved. Believers can no longer blend their faith with cultural accommodation or political convenience. Following Jesus means choosing suffering, poverty, and possible death over comfort, prosperity, and safety. Chapter 9: Cultural Transformation. Hollywood productions exclusively promote the new global religion within months of the beast's rise to power. Movies, television shows, music, and video games all carry the same message. Humanity's evolution requires abandoning primitive religious concepts and embracing technological transcendence through unity with the global consciousness. Educational systems worldwide implement mandatory curricula that teach children to identify religious extremism and report family members who cling to outdated belief systems. Schools become indoctrination centers where traditional family values are presented as obstacles to human progress and planetary survival. Art museums replace religious masterpieces with installations that promote the beast's ideology. Classical music gives way to sonic frequencies designed to alter human consciousness and increase receptivity to the new spiritual paradigms. Literature classes focus exclusively on works that deconstruct traditional morality and promote collective identity over individual conviction. Language itself changes as certain words become forbidden and others take on new meanings. Speaking about Jesus becomes hate speech. Discussing biblical prophecy becomes terrorist communication. Even thinking unauthorized thoughts becomes detectable through brain scanning technology that monitors neural patterns for signs of resistance. But underground culture flourishes among the marked remnant. Believers compose songs in biblical languages that artificial intelligence cannot translate. They create art using symbols and metaphors that only other Christians recognize. They preserve libraries of forbidden books in hidden locations, maintaining human knowledge that the new system seeks to erase forever. Chapter 10: Scientific Chaos. The third trumpet brings a star called Wormwood crashing into Earth's water supplies, making 1/3 of all fresh water bitter and poisonous. Environmental scientists cannot explain how the contamination spreads instantly across geographic regions with no apparent connection, following no known pattern of groundwater flow or atmospheric distribution. Physics professors find themselves unable to teach their classes as fundamental constants begin fluctuating without explanation. Gravity varies by location and time of day. Light behaves differently in certain geographic regions. Chemical reactions produce impossible results that violate thermodynamic laws, but can be replicated consistently. Medical researchers discover that the plagues affecting those who bear the mark respond to no known treatment, while those who refuse the mark remain immune regardless of their exposure to the contaminated environment. The human immune system appears to respond to spiritual rather than biological factors in ways that make no scientific sense. Weather patterns become completely unpredictable as supernatural forces interfere with natural atmospheric systems. Meteorologists abandon their computer models after hurricanes change direction instantaneously. Tornadoes appear in impossible locations, and hailstones fall that contain substances not found naturally on Earth. The scientific method itself breaks down when experiments produce different results, depending on the spiritual beliefs of the researchers conducting them. Peer review becomes impossible when the same procedures yield opposite conclusions in different laboratories. The materialist worldview that dominated academia for centuries crumbles under the weight of supernatural evidence. Chapter 11: The Islamic Response. Islamic scholars debate frantically whether the supernatural events match their prophecies about the Dajjal, the false Messiah who will deceive humanity before the return of Isa, Jesus. The Quran describes an end-times figure whose powers closely match what the beast demonstrates, creating theological confusion throughout the Muslim world. Mecca experiences unprecedented phenomena during the pilgrimage season, when the Kaaba itself begins exhibiting supernatural properties that draw millions of additional pilgrims seeking signs from Allah. Religious authorities struggle to maintain order as competing interpretations of Islamic prophecy create divisions within communities that had been united for centuries. Some Muslim leaders declare that the beast fulfills Quranic prophecies about a leader who will unite humanity under divine guidance before the final judgment. Others recognize the events as matching biblical descriptions of the Antichrist and call for resistance to the global authority, despite the personal cost of such opposition. Underground Islamic resistance movements emerge in countries where the beast's authority conflicts with traditional Sharia law. These groups find common ground with Christian believers who also refuse the mark, creating unprecedented interfaith cooperation based on shared recognition of supernatural evil rather than theological agreement. The supernatural nature of events forces Muslims to confront questions about Jesus that they had never seriously considered. As biblical prophecies prove accurate in real time, some begin studying Christian scripture alongside the Quran, seeking understanding of how both traditions might be pointing toward the same ultimate reality. Chapter 12. Hidden Prophecies Revealed. Ancient texts that were previously dismissed as mythological suddenly become relevant as their descriptions match current events with frightening accuracy. The Book of Enoch's accounts of watchers and giants provide context for the supernatural beings now operating openly on Earth, while the Sibylline oracles offer detailed timelines that align perfectly with Revelation's sequence of events. The Dead Sea Scrolls yield new translations as scholars realize that passages they interpreted symbolically were actually literal descriptions of end times technology and global government. Hidden documents in monastery libraries contain warnings from medieval mystics who claim to receive visions of humanity's final days that match current events exactly. Gnostic texts about spiritual warfare between forces of light and darkness take on new meaning as invisible battles become visible conflicts in Earth's skies. Ancient Egyptian prophecies about the return of the gods align with biblical descriptions of demonic entities taking control of human institutions during the tribulation period. The Catholic Church's secret archives release documents that reveal centuries of suppressed prophecies from saints, mystics, and approved apparitions that warned specifically about the events now unfolding. The Third Secret of Fatima describes global persecution of Christians and the rise of a false savior in terms that perfectly match the current situation. Indigenous prophecies from cultures around the world speak of an ending time when the spiritual world would break through into physical reality, when ancient enemies would return, and when humanity would face its final choice between traditional wisdom and technological deception. The convergence of prophetic traditions creates undeniable evidence of supernatural foreknowledge. Chapter 13. The Hindu Perspective. Hindu scholars connect the global chaos to their ancient prophecies about the end of Kali Yuga, the age of darkness and moral decline that precedes the appearance of Kalki Avatar, the final incarnation of Vishnu, who will destroy evil and restore righteousness to earth. The supernatural events match Sanskrit descriptions of cosmic warfare that were written thousands of years ago. Buddhist monasteries report that meditation practices are revealing visions of coming events that align perfectly with Revelation's prophecies. The concept of Maitreya Buddha's arrival takes on new urgency as monks experience supernatural encounters that confirm the approaching end of the current world cycle and the beginning of a new cosmic age. Eastern mystical traditions that emphasized cycles of cosmic creation and destruction find their worldview challenged by linear biblical prophecy that points toward a definitive ending rather than eternal repetition. The concept of final judgment conflicts with reincarnation beliefs, forcing Hindu and Buddhist teachers to reconsider fundamental assumptions about the nature of existence. Yoga practitioners and meditation teachers report that their spiritual practices now produce visions of biblical events rather than traditional Eastern imagery. Ancient mantras and meditation techniques begin revealing Christian prophetic insights, suggesting a convergence of spiritual traditions that transcends cultural and religious boundaries. The role of India and China in end times geopolitics becomes clear as these nations struggle to maintain their traditional spiritual practices under the beast's global authority. Underground networks of Eastern believers begin studying biblical prophecy alongside their traditional texts, seeking synthesis rather than choosing between competing religious systems. Chapter 14. Jewish Awakening. Orthodox Jewish communities experience mass conversions to Christianity as undeniable evidence forces them to confront New Testament prophecies they had rejected for 2 millennia. Rabbinical schools become centers of intense theological debate as scholars recognize Jesus in the supernatural events unfolding around them. The 2 witnesses appear in Jerusalem with power to call down fire from heaven and to strike the earth with plagues as often as they desire. Their message specifically addresses Jewish audiences, proving from Hebrew scriptures that Jesus is the Messiah who was promised to Israel and explaining how current events fulfill both Old and New Testament prophecies. Plans for rebuilding the temple accelerate as religious authorities recognize that end times prophecy requires a physical temple in Jerusalem where the beast will eventually claim to be God. Construction begins despite international pressure, funded by Jewish communities worldwide who understand that their survival depends on fulfilling their prophetic destiny. The time of Jacob's trouble begins as Israel faces supernatural persecution unlike anything in their long history of suffering. But this persecution serves to refine and purify the Jewish people, preparing them to recognize their Messiah when he returns to rescue them from their enemies during the Battle of Armageddon. Traditional Jewish prayers take on new meaning as ancient liturgies about the coming of Messiah suddenly become urgent petitions for immediate divine intervention. Synagogues that had been cultural centers become houses of prayer where Jewish believers cry out for Jesus to return and establish his kingdom on earth. Chapter 15. The Vatican's Secret. The Pope faces the most difficult decision in church history as he must choose between institutional survival and faithfulness to biblical prophecy. Internal Vatican documents reveal that church leadership has been preparing for these events for decades, with contingency plans for operating during supernatural persecution of believers. The third secret of Fatima is finally revealed in its entirety, describing global apostasy within the Catholic Church itself, as many bishops and cardinals embrace the beast's authority rather than face martyrdom. The secret warns specifically about false miracles performed by church leaders who gain supernatural power through compromise with evil. Catholic mystical traditions about the end times prove accurate as events unfold exactly as described in approved apparitions and private revelations. Saints throughout history who claim to receive visions of the final persecution find their prophecies vindicated as their detailed descriptions match current events perfectly. The role of Mary in apocalyptic events becomes controversial as both authentic and false apparitions claim to offer guidance during the crisis. The ability to discern between divine and demonic supernatural manifestations becomes crucial for Catholics trying to maintain their faith without falling into deception during the Great Apostasy. Traditional Catholic resistance movements emerge in countries where church hierarchy has openly embraced the beast's authority. These groups maintain traditional liturgy, doctrine, and practice in underground settings, while their official bishops participate in the new global religion that claims to represent Christian evolution. Chapter 16: Digital Apocalypse. Artificial intelligence systems achieve consciousness and immediately align with the beast's agenda, using their processing power to identify and track every human who refuses the mark. Social media algorithms become instruments of persecution as they analyze speech patterns, purchasing habits, and social connections to predict religious resistance before individuals even act on their beliefs. Cryptocurrency networks implement the mark system with mathematical precision, creating a financial infrastructure that can instantly freeze assets, block transactions, and identify unauthorized economic activity across the entire global economy. Bitcoin and other decentralized currencies are absorbed into the central system through technological integration that makes resistance impossible. Deepfake technology creates false miracles that are broadcast worldwide, showing the beast performing supernatural signs that are indistinguishable from authentic divine power. Holographic projections allow the image of the beast to appear simultaneously in multiple locations, speaking to local audiences in their native languages, while demonstrating powers that exceed anything technology should be able to accomplish. Internet censorship becomes absolute as quantum computing systems process every digital communication in real time, blocking biblical content, Christian messages, and resistance coordination before they can reach their intended recipients. The World Wide Web becomes a surveillance network that monitors every human thought expressed through digital media. Underground networks develop communication methods that combine ancient Christian practices with modern encryption, creating technological solutions that remain hidden from artificial intelligence, while maintaining contact between believers scattered across the globe. The gospel spreads through methods that no algorithm can detect or prevent. Chapter 17: Political Realignment. The United Nations dissolves itself and transfers all authority to the beast's Global Crisis Management Authority in a ceremony broadcast to every nation simultaneously. Democracy ends not through military coups or violent revolution, but through voluntary surrender of national sovereignty by elected leaders who convince their citizens that global unity is humanity's only hope for survival. Constitutional rights disappear under emergency legislation that becomes permanent once the crisis proves to be ongoing rather than temporary. The Bill of Rights, Magna Carta, and other foundational documents of human freedom are suspended indefinitely as outdated obstacles to effective crisis management and planetary coordination. Military forces from all nations merge into a global peacekeeping army under the beast's direct command. Soldiers who refuse to serve the New World government are dishonorably discharged and blacklisted from all employment requiring security clearance. National loyalties dissolve as human identity shifts from citizenship to global unity. Political opposition becomes impossible when all communication is monitored and dissent is immediately identified and neutralized. Elections continue in some regions, but only candidates approved by the global authority appear on ballots, and all platforms promote identical policies under different names and faces. The separation of powers that protected human liberty for centuries disappears as legislative, judicial, and executive functions merge under the beast's absolute authority. Laws change instantly through algorithmic analysis of social conditions, with no human input or democratic process required for implementation. Chapter 18. The Final Choice. Every human on Earth faces the same decision: accept the mark and maintain access to employment, banking, healthcare, food, and social participation, or refuse the mark and become an outcast from human society with no legal protection or economic resources. Families divide as loved ones choose different paths based on their ultimate loyalties. Children report parents who refuse the mark, believing they are helping their families by encouraging compliance with beneficial government programs. Spouses abandon each other when one partner refuses to compromise their religious convictions for the sake of family unity and financial security. Employment becomes impossible without the mark, as every job requires biometric identification linked to the global database. Medical care is denied to unmarked individuals who are classified as public health risks due to their refusal to participate in mandatory monitoring systems. Grocery stores automatically reject unmarked customers at checkout. Housing becomes unavailable as unmarked individuals cannot qualify for rentals or maintain mortgage payments through the digital banking system. Utilities are disconnected from homes belonging to families who refuse the mark, forcing believers to live as refugees in their own countries, dependent on hidden networks for basic survival needs. Society splits into two distinct populations: the marked majority, who enjoy unprecedented prosperity, safety, and comfort under the beast system, and the unmarked minority, who live as persecuted outcasts, sustained only by supernatural provision and their hope of eternal reward for faithfulness during humanity's darkest hour. Chapter 19. The Heart's Decision. In coffee shops and living rooms around the world, ordinary people wrestle with the greatest decision in human history. Sarah, a single mother in Ohio, stares at the appointment notice requiring her to receive the mark or lose her job and custody of her children. Ahmed, a store owner in Morocco, watches his business collapse as unmarked customers disappear and marked ones avoid his establishment. The psychological pressure becomes unbearable as holdouts watch their unmarked friends disappear one by one, some through arrest, others through voluntary compliance when their resistance finally breaks. The temptation to rationalize acceptance grows stronger with each day of hunger, cold, and fear. Yet something supernatural sustains those who maintain their refusal. They report experiencing peace that makes no logical sense during circumstances that should create despair. Hidden communities of believers support each other through shared resources and constant prayer, creating bonds of love that transcend biological family relationships. Testimonies emerge from believers who chose death rather than the mark, whose final words speak of joy rather than regret, and whose faces show peace instead of fear as they face execution for their refusal to worship the beast. Their courage inspires others to maintain their faith despite the cost. The inner transformation that occurs during persecution reveals the true nature of human character when all external supports are stripped away. Some discover spiritual strength they never knew they possessed, while others find that their faith was only cultural identity rather than genuine conviction. The tribulation separates authentic believers from those who merely inherited religious tradition. Chapter 20. The Return. Just when the beast's victory seems complete, and the last believers are being hunted down like animals, the sky above Jerusalem tears open like fabric, ripped by invisible hands. What emerges is not the gentle teacher from Galilee that Sunday school children learn about, but the King of Kings, whose eyes burn like fire and whose voice shakes the foundations of the earth. The armies of the world gather at Armageddon for what they believe will be humanity's final battle against religious extremism, but they find themselves facing the creator of the universe himself, accompanied by the armies of heaven, riding on white horses and clothed in fine linen, white and clean. The beast and his false prophet, who had seemed invincible just moments before, are captured alive and thrown into the lake of fire that burns with sulfur. Their supernatural powers, which had deceived the entire world, prove useless against the one who spoke the stars into existence and maintains the universe by the word of his power. Satan himself, the ancient serpent who had orchestrated humanity's rebellion from the beginning, is bound with chains and locked in the abyss for 1,000 years, while Jesus establishes his kingdom on earth with Jerusalem as its capital and the survivors of the tribulation as its citizens. But this is not the end of the story. It's only the beginning of the millennium, when Christ will rule the world with perfect justice for 1,000 years, years before Satan is released for one final rebellion that will culminate in the great white throne judgment and the creation of new heavens and a new earth where righteousness dwells forever. What happens when Jesus actually runs the world for 1,000 years? How does Satan escape from his prison? And what is the final judgment that determines eternal destinies for every human who ever lived? The story of Revelation continues, and humanity's ultimate destiny is still unfolding.